For our annual index, it looks at 118 different variables of the state's tax systems, and we evaluate them to see how simple, neutral, transparent, and stable they are. Nebraska is kind of middle of the pack. They used to be very poor in that, so they've been rising over the year, although they are ranked worse than a lot of the neighboring states. And so in the presentation today, I'm going to go through a couple different options, both short-term things that the state could do as well as long-term reforms. But generally what we're looking at is a corporate tax rate that's relatively high and a sales tax that's relatively narrow and somewhat high. And those are probably good places to look, as well as the inheritance tax at the local level. That's a good option to look at. Well, state and local tax burden, that's just a how much question. Right now, I think Nebraska's also middle of the pack in how much state and local residents are paying or Nebraska residents are paying in state and local taxes. And that's just a dollar figure. If you want to be paying less, rise in that, then you got to tax them less. Of course, there's different ways to go about doing that, but states make this decision. Should they be a high tax, high service state, or a low tax, low service state, or something to avoid would be a high tax, low service state. You don't want to do that, but that's ultimately a question that Nebraskans have to decide for themselves. We present information on what the cost side of the equation are, the benefit side, and whether it's worth it. That's something each of you has to judge. Probably look at the corporate income tax. One, there's no real reason to have a graduated rate structure on a corporate income tax. Now, there's a lot of reasons why one might want to have graduated rates on the individual side. I don't think even those are compelling, but there's really no reason to have one on the corporate side. Small businesses, large businesses, a large business can have very small profits, a small business can have very large profits, and because the rates are graduated, you're taxing them differently. So that's something you might want to look at, as well as the relatively high rate. Generally, corporate income tax revenues have been falling over time as businesses are moving towards partnership structures, LLCs, S-corp structures, and just the cost of collecting the tax and administering it rises, especially as states move to weird apportionment formulas away from the three-factor formula, and the rise of multi-state businesses make it a very complex and costly tax just in terms of every dollar collected. So you might want to even look at abolishing it, as some states have done. Well, you've got to be careful about tax incentives, because while it might be good for the first 5 or 7 years that the incentive package is in place, you got to think about what you're going to do to keep the business after that. And more to the point, what are you going to do to reward and benefit Nebraska businesses that year in and year out are creating businesses but might not necessarily be eligible for the limited number of tax incentives that you're making available. Now, when we looked at the tax costs of some select model businesses and compared them across the country, and we found that Nebraska is actually pretty competitive on that. 9th overall for mature businesses, and that's not counting tax incentives. And a key reason why that is Nebraska doesn't have its sales tax manufacturing machinery, which is a good thing. Something you might want to look at is getting that property tax off of business equipment. Right now there's a lot of tax incentives available to counter that, to kind of equalize the burden of that, but instead of doing that for just select businesses, why not get rid of the property tax on business for all businesses? And that's something that a lot of other states are looking at too. Another option might be to look at net operating loss carrybacks and carryforwards. Nebraska is much less generous than a lot of other states are on equalizing tax burdens over time for corporations. Right now, we owe more than we can pay at the federal level. We're spending way more than we're bringing in, and I think an obvious thing that both parties might go after in the near term is aid to states. Federal money paid out to the state governments. And of course, states are very dependent on federal funds for health care, for transportation, for a lot of other things. Thinking about what impacts will happen to Nebraska if the federal government starts paring back that aid, the sooner you start considering that question, the better off you'll be, because I think that that's an easy one that the feds are going to do, especially when it comes to Medicaid and transportation money.